Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Adrienne Sheetenhelm, and I'm a teacher here at Windham High School. Today I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Hawreh Haddadi, a 2013 graduate of Windham High School, and also the author of Finding Kurdistan, a Kurdish-Iranian-American's journey home. Hawreh's Amazon author bio states, Hawreh Haddadi was born on the mountains of Kurdistan, and soon after came to America with his parents and siblings as political refugees. Growing up in the state of Maine, Hawreh quickly fell in love with the beautiful scenery of New England and gravitated to playing basketball year-round. He would later travel back to the Middle East, where he would learn more about his roots and the struggles many people faced in that region. His travels and studies further made it clear that Americans live a far different life than most people across the world. Being fascinated with culture and political systems, he decided to pursue the social sciences in college and eventually graduated with a master's in political science. Since then, he volunteered for AmeriCorps, where he returned to Windham High School to help in our APEX program, and currently he is working in Portland for LearningWorks. Throughout Hawreh's education and work in the community, he has been working on this book, which was published in November, and we have the pleasure of discussing today. Today we hope to cover what the book is about, how Hawreh completed the writing process, and what it takes to have a goal and accomplish it. Welcome, Hawreh Haddadi.
Thank you, guys.
So come on in and take a seat near the front. Thank you. We're going to have a little bit of like an interview process, but at the end we'll have time for questions. So Hawreh, can you tell us a little bit about your experience growing up in Maine and here at Windham High School?
Yeah, Windham High School is obviously a great school. I think we have a pretty diverse group of folks here, freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors. Growing up in Windham in Maine was great. Portland being probably one of the most diverse cities in our state. It's quite obvious Maine is a pretty white state. Certain folks kind of stood out, and I think during my time up here, I really tried to get involved as much as I could. Play basketball, was involved in student council and some of the other groups at Windham. But I really enjoyed it, being a student at Windham High School. When I went to Boston for school, I just fell in love so much with the state of Maine that I had to come back. And I know many students at high school in general are thinking about leaving to college, probably someplace warmer. But you never know. I think we don't appreciate the beauty of Maine until we leave it, and here I am today.
The title of your book is Finding Kurdistan, a Kurdish-Iranian-American's journey home. Can you tell us a bit about what it means to be Kurdish and Iranian?
Right. So what I'm trying to do is not complicate the description here. The state of Iran is located in the Middle East, right? People in that country are referred to as Iranian. In this country, we refer to ourselves as American, right? And so, I think one thing that makes Iran unique is there's a lot of ethnic groups in that country, and to some people, they feel marginalized or not included in that system, which makes it clear that folks have to identify in a certain way, whether it's Kurdish, Turkish, for that example, and so on and so forth. And I think even in America we have that sense where we'll say, I'm Spanish American, Irish American. Why? To say that not only do we appreciate being American and respect our norms, but we also have heritage and roots throughout the world. And I think the title kind of highlights that yes, I am a Kurd who happens to be from Iran, who also adapted to American society, and proud to be those three identities, because I don't really have we don't really have an opportunity to pick where we want to live or where we're born. So I happen to have come from an Iranian background. With that being said, I'm a minority Kurdish background, and randomly ended up in the United States. So I'm very lucky to be here, and just proud of that because the reality is a lot of people throughout the world don't have the opportunities, protections, legal protection that I saw vividly as I traveled back to Iran.
We have a map behind us, and I was wondering if you could explain what is designated there.
Right. So obviously, if you get a map today in your history classes, your geography classes, you're not going to see Kurdistan on there because it's not an internationally recognized region. But with that being said, there are still millions of people who live in that part of the world who refer to it as Kurdistan, land of the Kurds. So as we see here, Kurdistan falls right in the middle of the Middle East. We have Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. The Kurds in Turkey make up probably 20 million Kurds, the biggest ethnic group. Regarding the four sections of Kurdistan. You can see Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And so you also see that Iran is ruled by mullahs and ayatollahs, far extremists in that country, but also minorities living within that predominantly Persian societies. But with that being said, we know Iraq isn't the safest places, or at least it wasn't until recently. But you see the Kurds are in a very unique situation of extremism, religious fanatics, and it's just an unfortunate situation to where they're in. Because if Kurdistan was to be, let's say, in the heart of Europe, some of the problems we see today probably wouldn't exist because there aren't the ethnic tensions or religious sensitivities that exist in that part of the world. I think we have some of that here in this country, but it's definitely not to the same degree, right? We have some conversations about race in America, some conversations about religion in America. But I think for the most part, America and Western civilization has come so far that we can talk about these issues freely and safely. But the reality is, in all those four countries, speaking about the Kurds, Kurdistan, freedom or equality is a very sensitive topic, and there have been many thousands of activists arrested for that.
When did your parents come here to America, and who in your family came over at that time?
Yeah, so it's been obviously an unbelievable journey. My parents are from Iran in the Kurdistan region, and in 1979, I'm sure you folks have read about or seen documentaries, Iran kind of shifted from a extremist monarchy to a radical theocracy or extremist theocracy. And at that time, it was a very unfortunate situation. It was unclear the direction the country was going to head to. But not too long after, it kind of became clear that it wasn't a suitable place to live, to raise a family. And so my parents left from Iran to Iraq, which is right next door. We know Saddam Hussein was there, right? And it wasn't the safest places for no one really, but specifically minorities were targeted. So as they took the journey from Iran to Iraq, they had to do that secretly because at any time could the Iraqi government detained my parents and myself and the siblings and send us back. But the journey didn't stop there. The U.S. Embassy is in Turkey, and so we had to go through the U.S. Embassy in Turkey to get certified and get the proper documentation. And so you see, like I mentioned before, the region is very unstable. The governments are not the most welcoming or hospitable to the Kurds. It's not like the Norwegian government or the British government or even American government for that matter, where if it wasn't for some of the policies in place before, I could have ended up in any other part of the world. And actually, we got accepted to go to Australia first, but my parents were so passionate and in love with America that they didn't really accept that. And they said they wanted to go to America. We had to wait a couple of years in Turkey until we finally got the thumbs up to move forward. So with that being said, at any time could the soldiers of the police forces could have arrested my parents and sent them back to Iran, and the result of that would have been execution. But there's no debate about that. My dad was very involved in activist movements in Iran, and so to talk about democracy in America is very beautiful and safe, right? You folks are not concerned to speak freely, speak respectfully, about some of the issues that are taking place in our country. And the country that I mentioned, it didn't matter how respectfully or how appropriately you talked about them, there was really no tolerance. And anybody who did, and even today there are thousands of people in jail just because they want to bring attention and bring awareness to this. And so, thankfully in America, we're not concerned to show the Kurdish flag, we're just talking about some of the issues that really impact us all. And so, with that being said, the more conversation and dialogue happens, the better we all are.
In your bio, I read from what is on Amazon, and it said that your family were political refugees. So what does that mean if someone hasn't heard that term?
Yeah, so we've heard of refugees, right? We've heard of immigrants. We've heard of folks coming as asylum seekers. Similar, but there are key differences in that. But as I mentioned before, my father specifically, my mother was also involved in supporting my father in that movement. My dad was a teacher at the time. But after the 79 revolution, minorities, specifically ethnic minorities, but religious and political minorities were also very censored. And it just wasn't safe to raise a family and speak about equality. And also, like, it's kind of tough. If you know, we talked before about living in America, like, how unfortunate would it be if you couldn't celebrate the 4th of July, right? It's an American holiday, Christmas, or some of the other, Halloween, right? You can't celebrate these because it's against the government. That's pretty much what the Iranian government is saying. And so it just became clear that they couldn't live there anymore, and they were willing to risk their entire lives to try to get out of that situation. So because my father was politically active, we had to seek refuge in the United Nations. In some of the Western countries, we were saying, we can take these refugees in because it's an obligation of ours to try to protect folks who can't protect themselves. And I think governments have obligations, and once they fail that, the international community kind of works together to try to meet those responsibilities. And so, as I mentioned before, the journey was kind of scary. I guess on the map it looks pretty peaceful, but going back to Iraq a couple of years back, going to Turkey and to Iran, even today, 2019, it's still not a safe place, and you really got to be careful what kind of things you talk about, and it could just end up really, really bad. Since then, I haven't been back to Iran, and I don't think I'll ever be able to go back to Iran, because we're just talking about two different forms of government. One is, in the case of the United States, one that's an open government that accepts criticism from its people, from its citizens, and tries to make improvements every 2, 4, 6, 8 years, right? But in the case of Iran and some of the other countries in the Middle East, when you try to make recommendations or some areas of improvement, it's seen as a threat. It's seen as you're an enemy of the state, which can be further from the truth. So my parents decided to take that journey, and I don't think we knew what to expect, right? They've never been to America before. They've never really understood what America is. They've seen it only on TV or seen it in the magazines, but as I mentioned before, just thankful to be here. And with that being said, we're all in this room, and we can all use the resources to our advantage. We have protections. We have the capability to do whatever we want. I mean, that's the reality in this country. Not to say it's an easy country to live in, but folks don't really fear to the same degree of being persecuted in the United States. Doesn't matter what political background, ethnic, religious background you come from. You can step outside your house in a public atmosphere and speak freely. And I don't think you have to be in fear of being arrested or detained or looked upon as an enemy of the state.
So you came to America, you were just a child, and you grew up in this culture, and you played basketball, and you loved Michael Jordan. And you then took a trip back with your family, and that was what inspired this book that you've now written. So can you tell us a little bit about that particular journey home?
Yeah, so I think this is Boston, Logan Airport. And yeah, I mean, it was very different, being coming from that part of the world. You have certain expectations, and you have certain ideas of what the Middle East is like, but also the conversation that you have with your parents. It kind of brings to light some of the cultural traditions. This is moments before we said our goodbyes, and we all went to Kurdistan except my dad, because it just wasn't safe. If he was to board a plane with us, he would have certainly been arrested, and I'm pretty confident probably executed moments later in Tehran, because they just wouldn't allow it. They wouldn't allow someone, a teacher who spoke freely and defended the values of all Iranians, to just return back from America. And so they didn't really care about us in the beginning, but I'm not going to spoil the book for you. At the beginning, they didn't care about us. We went right to the airport. We didn't have any problems. But at the end of the day, it showed that the government didn't care if you're a woman, if you're a child, if you're a tourist, that they will try to use you and make the situation to benefit their cause. But it was different, it didn't make sense at first why Dad can't come back. It was me, my mother, and siblings that went back. But it was unfortunate that we had to say bye to Dad at the airport, and he made his way back to Maine as we went back to see our homeland.
And you are a freshman in this, so Windham High School student,
Yep.
freshman.
Yeah, we're just finishing up freshman year, and into the summertime. This is one of the mountains. Let's take a picture. I think it's a small hut to the bottom left-hand corner that many of the villagers would oftentimes just spend the night on top of the mountains, because it was too risky of a journey at nighttime when there was wolves and wild animals. That could threaten you. And so mountains were everywhere. It's a very mountainous terrain. You can see the roads there, tiny roads between the mountains, just carved. It's just unbelievable. For those who like photography, for those who like scenery, hiking, it's just unbelievable. I mean, we definitely have our beautiful scenes here in New England, but I think just the terrain and the history and the culture, I think just enhance the beauty of that, the pictures. This is a village that I went to. If you just look at the houses, they're pretty unique. They're not the traditional looking houses that I've seen here in Portland or Windham. I mean, you're not going to find a nice auditorium like this in most of these parts of the world. But you can just see that there's so much hands-on working, craftsmanship with these buildings. A lot of mud is used. A lot of teamwork is used. My father always used to say that if there was a house being built in villages, the entire village would round up to build a house together, because it's such a community-based society. Whereas, here in the United States, if you want to get a house, you call a contractor, and it's taken care of in about a couple months. So that was interesting to see. This is a typical city in Iran, in the Kurdistan region. I believe it's Bokan. Pretty normal. There's trees in the Middle East. It's not all sand. There are, fun events that take place in the Middle East. I know there's some stereotypes that exist, but the climate is definitely different. I think on average we're talking about 105 on average in the summer times, and so I can get pretty hot when you're not used to it. I know we have pretty hot summers here in Maine, but it's consistently that hot. This is us at we were heading to one of the other villages, and as you see, we eat on the ground. It's a little different than what most folks are used to here. Even as long as at home, we still eat on the ground. It's just, I don't know, just the way we've been raised. It's easier. I didn't see much dining room tables while I was there, but it was neat. You can see on the top right corner has some boiled eggs. Scrambled eggs. We were here, you can see they have fish, which is pretty interesting. I'm not a big fan of seafood, which is, I guess I'm not in the right state because seafood is pretty big here. But we went to this little pond, and where you could basically pick out whichever fish you wanted to eat. And we're talking about these big fishes, all yellow and unique looking colors that I've never seen before. But it was pretty cool to just spend that time with my cousins that I haven't seen in many, many years. And I think it was a bit different, and just it was just an experience that one of the other places I want to travel to is parts of Africa. I'm not too familiar with that region, but it's about learning. It's about putting yourself in a situation that you're not used to. And I just had to go with the flow, and I had to make the best of it. At the end of the day, even with everything that came up in our trip, it was definitely an unforgettable time in my life, and just had some extraordinary memories built with some random people that I've never met in my life. but just because I had a U.S. passport, I spoke English, people looked at you differently. Not in a negative way, but like a surprise way. Hawreh must have come from Hollywood, because that's what all they see. It's the media, and so they see a certain image of what it means to be an American, or what it means to be coming from the White House, or if you will. But it was unbelievable. So this was a picture I took of, I don't know how young these girls are, but I think it was like elementary school, of the attire that ladies especially are required to wear in Iran. Something that they're forced to wear. I mean, I know here we like to wear our bean boots and our Gucci bags and our Nike and Adidas, am I right? You guys like to wear that kind of stuff? And so in Iran, that just doesn't exist. There's a certain mandated law that women have to cover up. And, for some people, definitely they like that lifestyle, but you can see here that the teachers, the students, they don't really have any other choice. And I think that's the big issue, is having that choice to wear what you like, decide what you want to wear. But this doesn't stop in high school, right? For the most part, students here can wear whatever they like, as long as it's appropriate. But you're not restricted to wearing style or whatever clothing you like. But this doesn't stop here. This continues high school, college, even after college. Women, especially in public, have to cover up, which is just, I think, was very different for me. That doesn't exist in the United States. But I think we should just appreciate sometimes how many protections we have. And I think once we think about the situation we're in and how lucky, I can speak for myself, I'm very lucky to be here. I don't know for you folks, but it would be pretty difficult to go back to that society and be told what to do when it comes to the way you think, the way you live, the way you eat. It was just completely different, but it was just the one thing that I saw. And this is us not too long before we landed in Tehran, the capital of Iran, where, and I talk about this in the book too, my sister had to cover up. She knew we were landing, and the captain came on the phone and basically said, just to remind our tourists, we're landing in Iran. No alcohol is allowed here. Alcohol is forbidden in Iran. People can be executed for that, if not sentenced to jail for a very, very long time, just for drinking. And so one of the things was the ladies on the plane had to cover up. And one thing I keep poking at my sister was throughout the trip, and I continue to poke her too, and just goof on myself, but it's that I didn't have to do that. I could wear whatever I wanted. There was no restrictions on men on the sense of clothing. You could wear whatever style you like to wear. You could, gel your hair however you want, whatever styles. So it didn't seem right. It didn't seem fair. And throughout the trip, my sister and mom got very frustrated with that reality for them. This is a picture I took in Europe when we were there. This is pretty neat. To the folks that who have traveled or been on a plane, it's a pretty neat experience. But I think for me, I was just, I like to think a lot. I like to try to predict the future, which I don't do too much of a good job with. But it's just, I was thinking the entire time I was on the plane of what to expect. And yeah, it was quite the journey of driving. Not only was it tough from the U.S. to Europe and then to Iran, it was quite the journey, but also driving here. It's probably similar to, let's say, Maine to Washington, D.C. on a car. So it was quite the journey and pretty exhausting, to be honest with you. And so this is a picture of a mosque. And I can't give you the exact translation right now, but on the mosque is a political slogan, which just shows that in Iran, politics and religion are the same. There's no separation, right? We have separation of church and state in this country. And I guess the importance of that is, in every capacity, the government and religion are used to tell people what to do, right? You can worship in America, and you don't have to worship in America. You can practice in a certain way, you don't have to practice in a certain way. And so I think it's that openness, that individualism that we see in the U.S. that doesn't exist in Iran. But, with that being said, I've never really seen a mosque up close, especially in this type of fashion, the traditional fashion that we've seen. It was nice, and I'm not the best photographer, but I just try to do the best I can while the car was going 50 miles an hour down the road, so not too bad. I guess the scenery was just pretty neat here. You can see it's kind of dry, but also lush at the same time. The vegetation was pretty clear. This was a unique mountain that I took a picture of. On the top, it was kind of like a geyser, if you will, a spring of some sort, which was pretty cool. Never seen it before. It looks like a rainbow mountain. I think I have another image on there, but I'm not sure. But you can see the colors really vibrant there. It was really cool. The wild herd is there in Iran, throughout the villages especially. But I didn't see too much stop signs, to be honest with you, when I was there. But there were definitely times where you were driving down the street and you could see this large herd coming your way, and cars would have to stop and just wait till the sheep or cows had to go by, which is very different. That doesn't exist in Windham or in any other part that I've seen in the U.S. So it was just cool. I guess you very much felt part of this communal, this community that had preserved a culture, which was just very interesting to me. This is a typical city in Iran. I believe it's Bokan. Fairground. Yes, there's village life in Iran. Yes, there's the quietness of the countryside. But there's also a city. This is Bokan. I don't have the exact estimate, but I'm going to say a couple 100,000 people. So it's a pretty big city. And we were just there. I really don't want to care to go right now, taking a picture from above. But it was fun. It was very fun. This was a river. And, we have some nice pools here. There's some chlorine, blue pools that we see in the area. But this is actually some of the places that we had to go swim. Because when the temperatures got hot, you don't really care how you're cooling yourself down, but you're just jumping in the water. And pretty scary stuff, because depending on the day, the river would actually rise. And just the speed and the power coming from the river was just unbelievable. But it was fun. I mean, with that being said, there's no woman there. Just a guy swimming. The women weren't allowed to swim there. And if they did, they had to do it on their own time. So to folks who like to go swimming with, their friends, you're very restricted to just guys. This is one of the villages. You can't see it here, but we're making our way there to Nistan, which was one of the villages where my parents were raised. Very small village, but you can see the mountains there, which is unbelievable. Typical houses in the villages kind of look like this. I know it's a little dark in that picture, but you can just tell that the countryside is very different than the city life. And for the most part, from experience, folks who live in the countryside are far more healthier, right? Cars don't really go there. People have to walk up the mountain and down the mountain every day. The work that they do is very hands-on, labor-intensive, and I personally have family members who live until their hundreds, just because being active, being in a peaceful environment. But also, city life is pretty stressful, and whether it's cars or being involved in a large city impacts people in different ways. This is like a spring. You can see some plumbing there, but I remember taking this picture and touching the water. It was absolutely freezing. This water came down directly from the mountains, and just unbelievably cold. And we were talking before, but there's no porta potties in Iran, right? You're not going to see that in villages. As we go to stadiums or events here, we go to the restroom. It's a village. You got to really, find the proper time to do what you got to do. But regarding the spring, shepherds and farmers who bring their livestock here, drink out of there, but also hikers, shepherds, anybody, including myself, we have to drink out of this water. It's super clean, but it puts into perspective, how sometimes we don't have the fancy bottle of water or the convenience of just walking into a store and just getting a couple gallons of water. You can see some goat there. We're trying to get the fire going and have some tea. Tea is a very big part of Iran, chai as we like to call it. People have tea throughout the day. I mean, we're talking about 10 cups of tea a day, which is good, I guess, if you're a tea fanatic. But I guess here in America, we're more coffee enthusiasts. I'm not going to rep any side, but I'm sure we got some Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks fans in the crowd. Those don't exist in Iran as well. There's no Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks. And I guess to break some of the stereotypes, Iran isn't just all sand. It's not just, so I guess some of the stereotypes we've been fed. I know I've been asked this question a lot. But, this is like, I believe an apple orchard. And you see peaches and apples there, and this is unbelievable. I mean, it's such a unique climate and terrain where you'll see everything from rivers and mountainsides to parts of the community are very dry. But just a mile down the road, this vast vegetation where farmers and crops are being produced.
So during your trip, you had a lot of positive experiences of getting to know the culture of Iran and reuniting with a lot of your extended family. Your prologue of your book also talks about a very jarring experience, and you don't have to go into the whole thing because we're all going to read the book at some point. But why don't you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I would say definitely like a wake-up call and awakening for me because I haven't really seen the U.S. government. I've only interacted with, not really interacted with them, but lived in a system where the U.S. government has ruled it, which means that I didn't really have to fear for what I said. I kind of repeated what I said before. You're pretty free in this country. I mean, we'll see that youth activism is playing a huge role in our country today because of folks like you guys. I mean, if you have a voice, you have an opinion, you can speak up freely. There's nothing really to lose. But when I was in Iran, this is one of the last photos I think taken while I was in Iran. But it was an unbelievable experience being detained by the government, being accused of spying for the U.S. government. I think being working for the FBI, the CIA is pretty cool, but I don't think they hire high school students to be working for them. But it just showed that the Iranian government was willing to do whatever they needed to do to make a point. And because we had U.S. passports, that was their proof or evidence that we're 100% affiliated with the U.S. government. But it was a very scary encounter. I'm not going to spoil it for the readers, but I think from that moment on, I really appreciated life more because you just don't know what to expect in life, and that was definitely something I did not expect. And I hope nobody has to go through it. We talk about animals being in captivity. I now better understand some of the hardship that some of these animals go through because as a human, I kind of went through some of it, and it's just unfortunate that there are many thousands of people suffering from the treatment of the Iranian government, and they're not given the opportunity to speak freely or to even just visit their homeland. I'm an Iranian citizen. I'm also a U.S. citizen. But to the government, it was the U.S. is all the same. But as we know, the Iranian people are not the same as the Iranian government. Just like maybe some things in our government isn't the same representation as us as Americans. And so I think that was something, awakening for me to say, all right, Hawreh, this situation took place. How are you going to use that in a beneficial way? And I think for me, the beneficial way was to talk about it. Because the reality is not a lot of people travel back to that part of the world or to Kurdistan specifically. And so I try to bring awareness to it that liberties, protections, freedoms don't exist for people. And it doesn't even matter if you're from that country. The title or the protection of citizenship doesn't really exist. There's no benefit to it there, as we do here in the Bill of Rights and our Constitution.
So you came back home, you were going into your sophomore year of Windham High School, and at some point you had an idea about a book. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so obviously coming back, the first thing I did was talk to my peers, my classmates, my teammates on the court. I had numerous conversations with my teachers at the time, and some of the themes that I got from them was they were very surprised, they were engaged, they were interested, they wanted to know more. And I said, how can I continue that conversation and open it up for more people that I haven't met necessarily? And so I think right after my trip, coming back in 2010, I kind of knew that something had to be told. I didn't know how to tell that story, but I decided I wanted to do it. And I think after high school came, college went, now adulting and working, I said, Hawreh, quit wasting time. If if you're passionate about something, if you want to bring change, the only thing that's holding you back is yourself. And so that was something that I decided that I had to do right away. And so far so good. We've been having some great conversations with people that I've never met about the Kurds, some things that, and I think the best part of it is hopefully showing a different perspective. We sometimes in the media talk about the Middle East as it's all the same, and yes, there's definitely similarities, but it's not like Middle East is one country. There's different languages, different ethnic groups, different norms in place. And I think the map behind me highlights that there are different minorities and languages, and governments for that matter. But living in America, I had an opportunity, and I think it's an obligation to speak freely about some of the things that are happening overseas. Because I don't think the U.S. government is coming after me. I don't have to fear showing the Kurdish flag that I'm now a threat to it. I think there's two approaches. You can see minorities or cultural differences as a negative, or you can see it as a positive. And I think the United States does a great job of bringing in those differences that we have, whether it's ethnic, religious minorities, or political minorities, but saying that's what makes us stronger. But at the country that I mentioned, they don't do that, and I don't know why. I'd love to talk to them and say, it hasn't worked for the last 40 years. Let's try a different route. But they see it as a threat. They see it that if you're not speaking with one language, that's a threat. If you're not wearing the same clothing, that's a threat. And so, I guess just to repeat that, protections we have here, the opportunities we all have being in this great state, this great country. There are millions, if not billions, of people across the globe who just can't relate to that. It doesn't make sense. And so I think this was just a great way to get that conversation going. And you folks as future leaders of this country, it started for me in high school. And I've come here in the auditorium numerous times and heard the principal talking and heard teachers talking. But it's like, if you folks have interest in writing or just want to follow your dreams, the only thing that's stopping you is yourself. So have faith, trust in yourself, and you can do it. I'm very confident that you can do it.
We may have some aspiring writers in our audience, and I'm wondering, so you have this idea, your goal is to tell your story and also teach people about the Kurdish culture. So what was step one? You've written essays in high school and college. What did you do to get past that?
Yeah, I think you have to ask yourself, what is the intent of writing? Like, what is your purpose in it? And we all have different purposes, which is fine, nothing wrong with that. Some do it as a hobby, some do it to make an educational point, some do it to just test the waters and try something different, which is all fine. For me was, I understood there was a unique story and there was a situation that took place that not many people are familiar with. But I think the other question was, and I think this was probably the toughest thing for me, was I don't want to say in a way that complicates it even more, right? I mean, the Middle East is a complicated region. The Kurds are a minority that aren't talked about enough. How am I, as a writer, going to do that in a way that's simplistic but also informative? And so that's something that I kept on juggling in my head of, what's the proper route to take? Because honestly, I could have written a book that was 10,000 pages, but it's just not. It's not about necessarily the length of the book, but the content of it. But even 10,000 pages, I think you couldn't fully get the beauties and the unfortunate realities of the Middle East in 10,000 pages. It's just so much going on, and you really got to pick and choose what's the proper avenue to take on this. But like I said, trust in yourself, because one thing I said before is that some of the leaders we see today, whether it's Oprah, whether it's Mark Zuckerberg, whether it's the president, whatever it may be, right? There's leaders in so many different fields that they started just like us. They were high schoolers once, they were teenagers once, and I'm sure they were nervous and scared. But what they did was work together and have trust in themselves first of all, because if you don't trust in your abilities, that's going to make it very difficult to reach that end point, whatever it may be on a project or a book for that matter. But I guess don't expect things to happen right away. That's certainly the case for me, or maybe even more so for my parents. That's been something that's, this journey here has been the making that's lasted decades. But I know, including myself, I'm pretty young myself. And sometimes we expect things to happen overnight or in a year or two, but results will take time. And the more you do things, typically the better you'll get at them. But I think it starts with the passion, the drive, because people can break you down and say you can't do it, and you shouldn't do it for whatever reason, but the passion from within is really the most important thing. And no one can really break that from you except yourself.
Right now, I think we have some time for some questions from the audience. So what questions do our students or teachers have about either the book or the writing process?
How long did it take you to write the book? What was your process in getting it published? Did you take it to...
So the question that was asked was, how long did it take to write the book, and what was the process to get it published, and how long it took?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the process is it's going to be different for different writers. I like to work at nighttime, so that just is quiet for me. I go to my room and just, I think the one thing I didn't expect was the editing process. Editing process was probably the most difficult process at all, because you have this vision in your head of how you want to put your thoughts on paper, and then you send it to an editor, it's just, I see what you're doing here, but you got to reform it or edit it in a way that the commoner, the average American picking it up will make sense of it. But the process I took was, we have kind of the beginning of the book. How would you like to start that? And then you have the end of the book. How do you want to close that? And I think when you have the the start point and end point in your head, everything in between has to kind of follow through, right? So for me, it was kind of the beginning of my trip. It was kind of the beginning of the book. But also planning each chapter. I mean, this book is about 40,000 words, so it took a lot of time really to plan it out and not make sure that each chapter is not too long or too short. But I think there's going to be different chapters that resonate with the reader more so than others. But that's just the way it is. People will be attracted to certain things you say, or certain, I think, sentences or paragraphs will resonate with some of their experiences, because, this trip was definitely a journey, but the reality is we've all been on a journey, right? Whether it's applying to colleges, whether it's, learning a new sport, whatever it may be. We all have different journeys and struggles. It's gonna look different. For me, it was kind of from a different part of the world. But we all have these struggles, and I think just consistently following through with your goals. I said I was going to write this book a long time ago. I didn't think it was going to be this long of a process, but that's part of it, because it's never too late to learn. It's never too late to learn. I had a classmate of mine who was in his mid-80s, I believe, in college, and he was going for his master's degree. It was just amazing. It was so beautiful. And I think the same is true with any project. It's never too late. So even though it took me some time, I'm still happy that it's out today, rather than waiting another 20 years and who knows what can happen then. And so it's about timing. It's about really having a strong structure and outline. But to get to your other point was who to contact, right? I mean, I'm no expert in writing or the publishing world, but there's so many avenues to take. There's self-publishing, independent publishing, traditional publishing with a larger publisher. And so I really contacted hundreds of publishers, because I guess it's about compatibility. You send out 100 messages, you're not going to publish your book with 10 publishers. All you need is one publisher, right? At least for the beginning. And so it's like colleges. You apply to college. I would say most experts would not recommend you apply to one college, maybe 4 or 5, or depending on your needs. Why? Because there's going to be some benefits and cons, pros and cons to each application. That's just going to make sense for you. And in the case of mine, I went with a small independent publisher in New Hampshire. That was close to home. That was convenient for me, and they were very involved with me, but they also team players who understood the mission that I had, and were very supportive in that. And so, with that being said, I got denied a lot. I heard back, and some people said, not going to happen, not going to work out for whatever reason. And I think an interesting thing was, too, that the publisher said to me was that, Hawreh, there are books out there who talk about people fleeing that region, right? Like, Persepolis is one of them. But there's other books out there who talk about the journeys or the struggles folks have from the Middle East to America, or from Africa to Europe, for that matter. But for me, it was the exact opposite, which I didn't even think about while writing this book. I was the exact opposite. I was living in America and then going back to my roots, which was kind of unique, and regarding Iran and the Kurds in the Middle East, there's not much of that perspective out there today, especially there's a lot going on in the world that we need more activists, we need more speakers, because this is a journey and a struggle that is going to last many, many years, and we can't do it alone. This book wasn't done alone, I could have done it alone, and that just shows that teamwork, working with folks to build partnerships, to try to get to that point, because we're all struggling at a certain point, but the more teamwork, the better. You folks don't have to be shy. I mean, you can ask any question you want.
So you talked about the religious government connections and how the women have to cover themselves and things. Can you talk a little bit about, from the perspective of your relatives, and how the Kurdish people, what their religion and beliefs are, and kind of contrast it with, or compare and contrast it with the general Iranian population?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. The Kurds in general are very moderate people in the sense of religion, at least. Like I said, we have different forms of ethnic groups in the Middle East, but the Kurds have always been a minority that religion has been used against them, right? Religion has been used against them to move political motive, and so we understand how tough it is to be on the other side of the argument. There's been a lot of support from the Jewish community, because I think there's a lot of similarity between the Jewish struggle and also the Kurdish struggle. The dysphoria that's taken place, where many people had to flee and also return. But I think going back to my relatives, it was interesting because as much at the time I didn't know about Iran or about the Kurds or about the culture within the country, they didn't know much about America either. And so they had the stereotypes like some of us have about that part of the world, about thinking Americans are all rich, or we have a certain lifestyle of young teenagers in America that teenagers there just don't understand and can't live in freedom and appreciation of. Because one thing I've seen is that the more you live is going to be each component of your life is going to be great. It's fun to be a baby for a certain time period. It's fun to be a young adult for some time period, and then adult or even senior. There's always certain benefits and appreciations for each time period. But I think for my relatives, it was just very different to speak with them and be like, this is where I'm coming from. I know there's a conversation I had about girls and dating and things of that nature, because they couldn't relate to that. There's so much censorship in that country, which we really here in America, there's not really much censorship, right? You go on Facebook, you go on Snapchat, you go on Twitter, whatever it may be, and do whatever you want. And there's pros and cons to that, right? But it's giving the power to the people rather than having this authority, whether it's religion, whether it's politics, or this institution telling people what to do and what's appropriate and what's not. But I think it was just I didn't really blame them. There's some things that I don't blame people, and I think just the situation they're in. Some of them are Kurds living in Iran, and they don't know how bad they have it, because they've just been brainwashed and indoctrinated to say this is the norm, but it doesn't have to be this way. And they don't really know how bad the situation is, because they've never seen anything better, right? That's all they've seen. And so for someone like me to go into that system, to go into that country or that culture, and be like, wow, this is how half the world, or a good percentage of the world is living completely differently, and we're doing pretty good, I think. I think as America, our short history, if we look at the 240 or so years, we've had a lot of hardships in our struggle, but I think the differences in the dialogue and the debates, at the end of the day, help us all. But when you're in a country that is not really looking for a conversation and looking for a dialogue, it's really hard to sit down and say, let's look at ourselves. Let's say, how can we make these improvements? But as I mentioned before, I understand it's going to be a long-term journey, struggle that isn't going to be taken care of overnight, but it's hopefully with books, with activism, with conversations, that we can bring more attention to that part of the world, and media and social media in general. They have such a pivotal role on spreading that awareness. And I'm sure we've all seen videos and things on Facebook that weren't covered by the media, but because of young activists, we brought attention to it, and at the end of the day, it made a big difference. But I think to get to your specific question, it's just that, it's, with some of the cultural attitudes or moods that we have in America, they're long-term. It's very rare to see such a drastic change take place in 5 to 10 years. Many of the struggles we see today have been long-term, but now we're kind of getting to the end point of it. But I hope more people, like I said, this book, you can't buy it in Iran. You can't buy it in most parts of the Middle East because they prohibit it. I'm not safe to come back to my country and say, hey, I'm from Iran. I want to make this country better. And I have examples on how I can do that. But when the government says, you can't come back, or your life is not safe, it's hard to bring that change.
Any last questions? All right. Well, I'd like to thank Hawreh for coming back to Windham High School. Thanks for joining us, and go ahead. You guys can follow Hawreh on Facebook. He's also on LinkedIn. You can get the book on Amazon. We also, I think, should be having a copy in our own library as well. So thanks for coming and being a great audience.